What is up, everybody? Welcome into a brand new edition of the NFL Draft Insiders here on Pro Football Network. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. And joining me, as always, is the one, the only, the Tony Pauline. You can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. Tony's got all the stuff that you were looking for today. He's got some college declaration news, some general manager news, some coaching news, all the stuff that you want to hear. So make sure to stick around for the entirety of the show. And of course, we'll always get to some rookie review at the end as well. But before we get to any of that great stuff, Tony, how the hell are you doing?
I'm okay. All the stuff you're looking for. I think that's why my wife married me, although that's what she probably thought some 20 years ago. I know she said that today, but also have to mention, sadly, this is the last show Andy Herman and I will be doing together. Andy's is on to bigger and better things after this week's show. You know, as the old song used to go, they say breaking up is hard to do. And now I know that it's true. So this is it for you on the Draft Analyst podcast.
It is. As I mentioned to Matt, if you guys ever need a fill-in, I will absolutely be here. This has been one of my favorite things to do week in and week out. And I'd be remiss, Tony, not to thank you for all that you've done and all that I've learned from you while doing this podcast. You've certainly been a great mind to pick week in and week out. And now I get to be one of the loyal listeners that's chiming in each week. Also would be remiss not to thank Matt Canada as well as Pro Football Network for this opportunity. Getting to talk with everyone about the NFL draft and rookies in football has been something that I haven't taken for granted. Obviously, I get to do it from a Packers standpoint with Packer Report and Pack-A-Day and things like that. But getting an audience to talk draft and college football has been really, really fun. So definitely going to miss it. But appreciate all that you guys have done for me, and I'll be around, I'm sure.
I think the one regret I have is we were not able to see you in Vegas in action last year during the 2020 NFL draft. We all know what happened.
That is going to be one of the great, regrets that I have. I've never made it to an NFL draft personally. So to be able to go there and cover it and be with you guys and Pro Football Network was a lot of crappy things happened in 2020. And there's a lot of worse things that happened than that. But that was definitely the one that's going to stick with me for a while. But hopefully down the line, again, we'll get to do something. Maybe I'll see it at a draft or a combine at some point, Tony. But we've got a lot to cover today. Enough about me, to say the least. And we have to start with the New York Jets. If this is going to be my last time on, Tony, we got to start with the New York Jets. So let's start right there. ESPN published an article stating that basically the Jets want to find a overall coach, a team coach, not somebody that specializes necessarily in offense or defense or special teams, but somebody that I'm assuming can build a culture for the New York Jets, which sounds great on the surface. But let me ask you, how do you feel about that, Tony?
A CEO of a coach, as it's been broadcast. And listen, this goes back to what I said about 3-4 weeks ago on this podcast when I broke the news, where I reported that the Jets were basically looking for an alpha dog type of coach, sort of a strong disciplinarian to oversee everything. They want that strong personality, that alpha dog coach, to basically run the whole show on the field. Not so much the offensive specialist to either help develop a new quarterback they may draft or helpfully salvage Sam Darnold. Not a defensive coordinator, but really that alpha dog type of guy that will put other people in charge and run the show himself. Goes hand in hand what we reported on this podcast just about 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah, you were certainly ahead of the curve there. Obviously, everyone wants to know, the rumor mill is churning about what potential head coaching candidates could be in the mix here. Don Martindale has certainly been somebody that you've mentioned in the past, but tell me a little bit more about Matt Campbell from Iowa State, and could he potentially be in the mix for this New York Jets position? Matt
Campbell is a name that always crops up. It cropped up last time when the Jets had a head coaching opening. He's talked about a lot. I got to say, from what I'm hearing, I think it's less than 5%, even maybe less than 1%, that Matt Campbell is the next head coach of the New York Jets for a couple of reasons. I mean, Matt Campbell turned down an interview with the Jets last time they had a head coaching opening, although that was Mike McCagnon and Joe Douglas is in charge. And I really think that, number one, Matt Campbell's only going to leave Iowa State for the NFL if the situation is perfect. And I don't see the New York Jets as being a perfect situation for him for a variety of reasons. I also think that he doesn't fit that alpha dog CEO type of coach, the guy who's going to oversee everything and let people run the offense and defense under him what they want. The other thing is I think Matt Campbell likes the college coaching game. He's not going to move on to the NFL unless it's absolutely perfect. Personally, I think he should have gotten that Texas job, although I don't know that he would have even taken the job if it was offered to him, because he would not have wanted to coach against his former team, guys that he recruited at Iowa State. Reading the tea leaves, and this is just speculation on my behalf, I think that Matt Campbell, who is known as a good guy, a lot of people like him, I think he feels he's got unfinished business at Iowa State.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, he's built a really strong program there, and it makes sense that he'd want to return and have the opportunity to kind of see that through. When I think of potential, you know, CEO, head coach type personalities, you know, I'm interested in your thoughts on Don Martindale, if that still kind of fits the mold. I think of a guy like Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern who can, you know, kind of hang that hat. I know he's kind of a defensive guy, but he's obviously built a very strong program at Northwestern. But, you know, what are some potential names that kind of fit that mold as Jets fans are starting to think about this?
Well, I think it's those two. And I think Martindale, we've talked about him a lot on this program. People speak highly of him. They think, you know, he's a guy that the players not only respect, but the players like, and he's a disciplinarian. He's been in the league for a while. I think Pat Fitzgerald fits that mold. The only thing with Pat Fitzgerald is, you know, he's basically starting from the ground on the NFL level. And he's going to have to recruit it, bring in offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators to run the show for him. I just don't know that that's the way the Jets want to go at this point in time. They could, but I tend to shy away from that.
All right. Any other word on the Jets before we move to the Texans?
They're going to probably interview everybody and anybody under the rock until they finally make a decision.
Do you get the feeling, I know some years it almost feels like an arms race where everyone's trying to get their guy right away before that guy gets hired, or, you know, in other years it's more like, you know what, we're just going to take our time. We're going to interview 12 to 16 guys and we're going to make sure that we get this right. It seems obviously based on what you're saying that the Jets want to move more in that second direction and get it right rather than rush to try to get somebody. But I mean, usually it almost seems like there's been a hire by now where somebody's rushing to get the hot name out there.
I think there's a couple of forces as far as that's concerned. You do have some quality candidates out there. I think the league wants it done a certain way. The Jets basically rushed with Todd Bowles. They signed him right away. Adam Gase wasn't so much a rush job as it was desperation because they lost out on Matt Rule and they kicked the tires on Mike McCartney. And the Jets have even in the past have even used these search organizations. That's how they got John Idzik, which blew up in their face, or that's how they came to hire John Idzik, although Idzik was not at the top of the search organization's list of GM candidates. So, you know, it makes sense. And Joe Douglas, I'm sure, will use all his contacts in the league to interview these guys and basically parcel down. I think the interesting thing with the Jets is what kind of input do the owners have? I'm sure Jet fans are saying hopefully little to none, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, you never quite know. The owners like to get involved in those major decisions from time to time, to say the least, which, you know what, Tony, if I owned an NFL team, I probably would too, and fans would probably hate me for it, but I kind of get it at the same time. Let's move over to the Houston Texans, who have hired their general manager, one of the teams that actually have made the hire so far. They get their new GM, Nick Caserio, from the New England Patriots. I know there's some eye rolls in Houston Texans Nation because it's another, personnel person from the New England Patriots, which, whether it's been a coach or personnel person, hasn't always worked well in the past. But this has been somebody that a lot of teams have wanted. And you have actually mentioned way back on, what was it, June 26th, that the Texans were interested and were maybe even going to wait until this season to make the move so that they could get their guy in Nick Caserio. Well, they now got their guy.
Yeah, I said that in the June 26th question and answer when someone asked me, would the Texans hire Caserio as their GM for the incoming season, when there were all kinds of rumors about that, and it said no, it wasn't going to happen. They were going to go hard after him. You know, it's ironic because Deshaun Watson just this week said he thought that the team needed and the organization needed a culture shift. Well, they're going to get it with Caserio. Now, let's go back. And again, on this podcast, we talked about how the fact that Jack Easterby, who was the executive vice president of football operations for the Houston Texans, a guy who worked for the Patriots for the 6 prior years before he came to Houston, was basically in charge of the show at Houston, which it's not surprising that Caserio was brought over to Houston with Easterby basically calling the shots. So, I mean, you're right. It really hasn't worked out for a lot of the Patriot guys, although Caserio has been in high demand the past couple of years.
Yep.
Whenever a general manager opening pops up, his name is always at the top of the list. And as we said a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about his name being connected with the New York Giants, they always seem to reel him back in. I think this time was a situation where he felt with the direction that the Patriots are going and the talent that's already on that Houston roster, why not go to Houston, especially since he's got a guy there in Easterby who he is, he's familiar with. As far as what's going to happen with the coaches, I haven't been able to really put my thumb on the pulse. I will tell you this. There are a lot of people who feel that Eric Bieniemy now kind of moves down a couple of notches, and it's not such a shoo-in that they're going to go hard after Bieniemy. It bears watching moving forward.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And you bring up a really interesting point too, because, listen, if you're a hot GM candidate, there's, certainly a couple of places. Jacksonville makes some sense right now with all the salary cap that they have, potentially, well, not potentially, very, very likely Trevor Lawrence, and a lot of good things going in their direction with a young roster. I'm interested in your thoughts though on that Texans roster, because yes, absolutely have some talent, and you've got the quarterback in Deshaun Watson. But some salary cap, issues, no draft, no top draft picks coming up because of some of the trades that they made. Is this a team that has a desirable situation? Obviously it was for Caserio, but I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
You got the quarterback. You hope you have the quarterback, I should say. You got the quarterback under contract. You got some good players on defense with J.J. Watt. You got a good left tackle there. Obviously, yeah. I think they're going to need to get some corners and as well as some receivers in there. But I think the major pieces are in place where, and we said this all along, I mean, it was sink or swim with Bill O'Brien because they had a talented team. And obviously it was sink for Bill O'Brien for a variety of reasons. It's not a situation like the New York Jets or the Jacksonville Jaguars where you're starting from scratch. I mean, it could be a couple of solid free agent signings and then maybe some decent players on day 2 of the draft when their name is finally called to the clock. I like the situation, which is why I think Caserio was one of the reasons why he went there. It's not a rebuild from the ground up.
No, you're right. And anytime you get the quarterback and a franchise left tackle, those are 2 pretty solid building blocks to the foundation right there, to say the least. All right, let's jump over to the New York Giants, who decided that they are going to retain Dave Gettleman. This has been something that's been oft talked about, including here on the podcast. I'm guessing that you weren't surprised by this, Tony, but what was your reaction?
Well, we said a couple of weeks ago that I had heard that there were people who were close to the Giants felt the needle was moving towards Gettleman being released. Obviously, that didn't happen. This was a John Mara decision. The owner, I'm told, basically Mara's a loyalist. He wanted to give Gettleman, one more chance, or I should say another chance. There were some people who I spoke to who were close to the organization were not too fond of the decision, but that's the way the Giants operate. I knew there wasn't going to be any rash decisions. Some of the picks he's made have worked out well. Saquon Barkley was a terrific pick before the injury. Daniel Jones, I know a lot of Giant fans really dislike him. I think it's a situation where, when he's at the top of his game, he's terrific. You got to protect him. Andrew Thomas has been up and down, but there have been some other good players. I mean, he's really, Gettleman, to his credit, has developed a terrific defensive line. We'll see what happens with Leonard Williams, who's was franchised last year moving forward, but he's had a monster year, and he's put some other pieces in place. I think what will happen is Gettleman's future next year will sink or swim as to how Daniel Jones develops or doesn't develop.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. Obviously, we learn every year that some of these quarterbacks just need a little bit more time to develop. I don't know that it's an apples to apples comparison with Josh Allen, but we've certainly seen the leap that Josh Allen took this year. I'm not saying that that's going to happen with Daniel Jones, but I'm also not saying that it's not going to happen. They've really built that defense up. The Leonard Williams trade was interesting at the time. As you mentioned, it's going to be very interesting to see what they do with him in this offseason. I think Jabril Peppers was a underrated acquisition. I also think Bradbury at corner has played really, really well for them. So to your point, it's certainly not been all bad. And I think you and I are both on the same page here. I still have a lot of faith in Andrew Thomas and think that he's going to develop into a really strong left tackle. Sometimes, again, rookie year, no rookie mini camps, no OTAs. I know players like Tristan Wirfs, albeit on the other side of the line, and Jedrick Wills maybe set the bar pretty high this season, but I still think Andrew Thomas is a hell of a prospect moving forward.
Also Logan Ryan, who they signed, and it's worked out for him. Josh Allen, is there any coincidence that his career really took off when they brought Stephon Diggs in?
Yeah.
And the Giants don't have that type of receiver. I think the one thing that I question is this love for Evan Engram, because as we talked about during the trade deadline, they look at Evan Engram as a premier player. I know he made the Pro Bowl this year, but as Giant fans will tell you, he drops a lot of passes in games, critical moments. Dropped a couple of passes against the Cowboys on Sunday. Had that horrible drop on the Thursday night game against the Eagles, which cost the Giants the game. Great athlete who, I don't know how he made the Pro Bowl. Needs a lot of work. He's got great upside, but boy, he's a heartbreaker at time for the Giants.
Yeah, the analytics are really rough on Evan Engram. I know Packer fans are very upset that Evan Engram made the Pro Bowl instead of Robert Tonyan with his 11 touchdowns this year and 0 drops in comparison to Evan Ingram's quite a few. I don't know the exact number, but I know that's definitely been a point of contention. But, there's certain players, Tony, that I think get a little bit of a benefit of obviously their draft grade or, their draft round, as well as their Madden rating. And I think Evan Engram is one of those players that sometimes in the eyes of fans and players, when that Pro Bowl voting comes up, they see him with a high rating on Madden, was a first-round draft pick. They see the speed and they'll see some highlights on SportsCenter every now and again. But when you put the overall picture together for Evan Engram, he still has a ways to go to grow as a player and become the player that they really need him to be.
And if memory serves me, Engram was not selected by Gettleman. I think Gettleman's first pick was Saquon Barkley. I think it was Jerry Reese.
You might be right there.
Year who was an Evan Engram player, yet Gettleman seems loyal to him.
All right, let's talk some NFL Combine. I know you've got some news on this, so I'm going to just let you take the floor.
The news is there's no definitive news. I wish there was, but there's no definitive news. And there's a lot of rumors that are swirling around, which I'll go through. No invitations have been sent out yet as far as the Combine is concerned. I'm hearing it could be pushed back a week until the March 8th time frame. I'm told that it's a situation where they could, if necessary, just send the players there to do medicals only. There's rumors circulating that Dr. Alan Sills, who is the chief medical officer for the NFL, is recommending that the Combine be canceled altogether. So really, there's nothing definite as far as the Combine's concerned, sort of like what we saw in the lead up to the opening of camps, where the league thinks it looks like they're just going to wait it out, see what happens, and then make a decision at the last possible minute to see where we are with the whole COVID-19 situation.
Yeah, and I think the NFL has, been very consistent with this sort of philosophy the entire way of not making any major decisions or, any final decisions on anything until they absolutely have to, which, looking back at it in hindsight, has been really the right call the entirety of the way. I think we've seen the difference in college football, especially the Big Ten, who made decisions, then waffled on it, then had to go back and forth, which has been a nightmare at times. Whereas the NFL has said, you know what? We know that there's a deadline at some point that's coming to make these decisions. When we get to that deadline, we will make the decisions based on the information at that time. And, the no news is probably not news, because I suppose we maybe could have seen this coming based on their decisions up until this point.
I guess, it's interesting because at this point in time, most of the invitations have gone out to the seniors, or the first wave of invitations have gone out to the seniors. And then they wait for the underclassmen list to come out, and then they invite the underclassmen. And then if there's any spots left, they will invite the second tier of seniors to the Combine. There's talk that they may push it back even further and then expand the number of players that they invite so they can cut back on the pro day workouts. There are some people who are saying that, they may just have pro day workouts. So that may be easier. I think that's going to be kind of tough because, everybody talks about the 40 times and the vertical jumps and everything else at the Combine, but the most important aspect of it are the medicals. So I don't know. And the medicals, basically the teams get, if not their entire medical staff there, most of their medical staff there to do the physicals. You're not going to be able to do that on pro day workouts.
No, certainly not. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming, do they do any medicals at Senior Bowl that the teams get?
They will do general exams, but it's nothing like the Combine. I mean, the Combine is really a MRIs. They will pull on legs. They will test joints like they've never before. The Senior Bowl, they'll just give general exams to make sure the guys are healthy and can play. But it's nothing that, unless it's something extreme that no one knew a player had, that's going to hurt his draft stock, where that is just it could potentially help do that at the Combine.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. Any other news on the combine, Tony?
Wish I had some positive, definitive news, but nothing as of yet.
We'll get there at some point for sure. Well, let's move over to some news that we do know, and that's some college football declarations. Let's start with Trevor Lawrence, the big name, which is completely expected, but he does make his announcement that he is moving forward with the NFL draft, the insanely likely number 1 overall pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Probably the right choice here, Tony.
You think so? I mean, obviously, we know he had no problem with the Jacksonville Jaguars having the first pick of the draft compared to all the reports and the stories and the conspiracies that if the New York Jets had the first pick of the draft, he was not going to enter the draft. He was going to go back to school. But, I mean, the guy really has nothing to gain by going back to school for another year. He's far and away the number 1 prospect. There's no way the Jacksonville Jaguars don't take him with that first pick of the draft. He makes that Jacksonville Jaguar job so much more enticing right now. He's he's not a can't miss prospect as far as I'm concerned, because there's no such thing as a can't miss prospect, but he's a generational, once in a lifetime prospect that plays the quarterback position. He just gets better and better. He's a real leader on the field as well as off the field. As I said, you talked about how the Big Ten waffled as far as the upcoming college football season. Listen, for those of us who enjoyed college football, we owe Trevor Lawrence, I believe, a debt of credit, because when the conferences were falling by the wayside and postponing their seasons or canceling the fall seasons, it was Trevor Lawrence who took the lead with "We want to play." And I think that had a lot to do with the impetus of the ACC and later on the SEC playing. I mean, I hope they get a good coach there. He's a guy that I think is, he's better than Andrew Luck. And Andrew Luck, when he was healthy and on the field, was a sensational quarterback.
Yeah, he certainly was. It's a really fun offseason for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Happy for that franchise. We'll see, like you said, what happens with GM and head coach there. Getting Trevor Lawrence likely with the number 1 pick. They've got some young, exciting talent. James Robinson was a really nice find as an undrafted free agent at running back. Really like DJ Chark, and I think that combo, Lawrence to Chark moving forward is going to be good. They got a couple of really nice young offensive tackles. Some young talent on their defense that hasn't completely come to fruition yet with CJ Henderson, Chason, Josh Allen, to say the least. But they've got some pieces there to work with, to say the least.
Absolutely. So it's just a matter of bringing the right guy. Is that guy Urban Meyer? I mean, the rumblings are getting louder. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, Urban Meyer would be an interesting coach there. But again, it's got to be one of the 1A jobs on the market for both the GM and the coach based on, again, all the free agent dollars, Trevor Lawrence, the draft picks, all of it all together is a pretty sweet deal for the Jaguars and that ownership team right now. All right, Zach Wilson, BYU, another top name, another player that we have, oft discussed here on the podcast. He does make his decision that he is also officially entering the NFL draft. Also seems like a very wise decision by the young man. Thoughts on Zach Wilson?
No surprise here. I mean, we had said on this podcast, I put it at 99%, probably should have put it at 99.9%. I mean, again, there are a lot of people who think that in time, Zach Wilson will be the number 2 quarterback, or the second best quarterback, I should say, to come out of this draft. I did my film work on him. The one thing about Zach Wilson is he doesn't have a huge arm. He's not a gunslinger. He's not a guy that's going to drive deep passes with speed. Some of his long throws hang and take a while to get there. So with that said, I think it's going to be a specific offense that he has to play in, a timing offense, a West Coast offense, not a consistent vertical offense where you're going to want to play him. But the fact is this, he's a smart guy. He gets it between the ears. He's a great leader. He doesn't make bad decisions. He can pick up yardage with his legs. He can make plays throwing the ball in or out of the pocket. He just does not have those top-notch physical skills. And he did it. He's done it in the past for BYU. He was terrific this year, although the talent that BYU, or the competition I say BYU played against, was not top-notch.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how some of this stuff really works its way out. I mean, he would be a glorious fit, in my opinion, with the San Francisco 49ers long-term and give him some time maybe behind Jimmy Garoppolo. Also, if Arthur Smith gets a head coaching job, Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator, could see him really sliding in with that offense as well, dependent upon how that would all work out. But just going to be a really interesting offseason to see how all of these dominoes fall, how the GM and head coach situations really alter some of those draft decisions. Because as you mentioned, Zach Wilson may be a scheme specific guy that some teams really like, some teams don't. And I guarantee you the differences on draft boards between a guy like Justin Fields and Zach Wilson may be very scheme dependent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interviews and the whiteboard work or the draft board work, whatever you want to call it, for Zach Wilson is going to be very impressive. There was a question somebody said, is he really arrogant? I'm told people I know talked to him said, no, it's not a problem. You always want your quarterback to have that edge. But I'm told with Zach Wilson, it's nothing over the top.
And that's awesome. You want that hint of arrogance, not over like Brady's got a hint of it. Rodgers got a hint of it. Like it's not too much. They're good teammates, but you want a little bit that they feel like they're going to be the best and they want to go out and prove it every week. That's a good combination to have. It sounds like Zach Wilson has it. So he's going to be a fun player to watch come draft time. All right, how about another quarterback? Let's stick with the quarterback position and let's go to Stanford with David Mills.
Surprising decision, to say the least. People told me before the season that if Davis Mills really hit it out of the park in 2020, he could potentially be a top 15 pick. Obviously, the Pac-12 was started late. He didn't play that many games, and he was up and down. He was inconsistent. The thing about Davis Mills is he's got terrific physical skills. He's got a stronger arm than Zach Mills. He's got great stature. He can withstand the rush. He can make plays with his legs, can power the ball through the tight windows. The problem is sometimes he's a little bit all over the place with his accuracy. Sometimes he's a little bit hesitant making decisions. He's hesitant pulling the trigger. I'm surprised that he entered the draft. He's one of those guys I thought would have really benefited from another year going back to Stanford. I'm told, with Stanford, a lot of these guys graduate early, although Mills, from what I'm told, is a few classes shy of graduating. They see all their buddies leave early and make a lot of money. Mills, he's sort of a wild card at the quarterback position. He could be a 5th-round pick. He could be a 3rd-round pick. Regardless, he's got great physical skills. He's just going to need proper coaching and a bit of time for him to succeed at the next level.
Yeah, when you start talking about, especially if it's like an early day 3 pick, 4th, 5th round, something like that, that's really kind of what you're looking for is those developmental traits. You're not looking for somebody to come in and start right away. Somebody that can maybe be a developmental 3rd quarterback, probably not a backup day 1, but, in maybe 2 to 3 years can develop into somebody who could be a top tier backup or maybe a spot starter. And if you hit on something else and you get it's basically a lottery ticket and you hit on it, great. But, like you said, you want to see those players maybe hone their skills a little bit more in college, but we'll see where he ends up going in the draft.
Davis Mills has got starting potential at the next level. He's definitely has the physical skills to start in the NFL, and he's flashed the ability as a starter as far as his accuracy and pass placement. It's just a matter of putting it together on a consistent basis.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Let's go to Bryce Thompson, the cornerback from Tennessee.
Bit of a surprise entry, 3rd-year junior. Terrific cornerback on film. And what I'm hearing with Thompson is on film, he's a 3rd-round pick. But with a guy like Thompson, where there's not that much known about him, as far as his true height, weight, and speed, a lot's going to be determined, or his ultimate draft stock will be determined on how he tests. If he runs well, he could end up as a top 100 pick. He tests well, does well in the shuttles, vertical jump. If he comes across as an average athlete, he's going to fall deep in the draft. Good ball skills, good film. We got to see what kind of athlete Thompson is.
Yeah, some of those unknowns, you love the tape, but some of those unknowns really need to get checked out. And that's why hopefully the combine takes place so you can check some of those boxes off and say, yep, we like everything about him. And maybe you can even move his draft stock up a little bit. Or you know what, we still have all those unknowns and now we have to move him down the board a bit because we don't have the answers to the questions that we need.
Especially at the cornerback position.
Yeah, that's the height, weight, speed can be very important there. Let's talk about Charlie Kohler, the tight end from Iowa State.
A lot of people like Charlie Kohler. I'm told about 50-50 right now. He's going through the process, going to decide what he wants to do, kind of looking at, how this year's tight end class compared to next year's tight end class, although there's no definites. The thing with Kohler is this. He's a real good pass catcher. He's a solid tight end. He plays intelligent football. I just don't think he's a guy that's going to run very fast in pre-draft workouts. So, if he comes out and he runs in the high 4.7s or gosh forbid the low 4.8s, doesn't mean he's not going to be a good NFL player. There's not just a big market for that type of tight end in the NFL draft. I think regardless, he's a day 3 pick. I think he can be a very good player at the next level. He's just not your natural seam stretcher. He's not a guy that's going to outrace linebackers down the middle of the field or down the sidelines. Catches the ball well, does a decent job blocking, although they got 2 other tight ends at Iowa State that get the job done blocking, so they don't need Kohler to block all that well. What I'm hearing right now, I would put the percentages about 50-50 Charlie Kohler entering the draft or going back to school. The fact is this, Brock Purdy's going back to Iowa State. Talked earlier about Matt Campbell, no decision's been made there. Maybe, if Campbell goes back for another year at Iowa State, maybe a little bit too enticing for Charlie Kohler to go back to return to Iowa State and try and win a Big 12 championship.
Yeah, I think, if they all of a sudden get everyone back and the band's back together, could make a ton of sense. And all of a sudden, if you have to go through a new coach with a new offense, then maybe you make your way to the NFL rather than maybe having a year where you have to learn something new and maybe you don't have the season that you were expecting to have. So I think maybe a lot up in the air dependent upon what happens there at Iowa State. Now let's go over one more, a offensive lineman that we talked about a bit already from Boston College, and that's Zion Johnson.
Talked about him last week, and I said when Matt did the show that the feeling out of Boston College was Zion Johnson was going to return, and that's exactly what he announced. He's going to return for another year at Boston College. I was told that coaches told Johnson if he returns for another year, he could be a first-round pick in 2022. I completely disagree with it. Johnson moved to left tackle this year out of necessity. He was not very good at left tackle. I think he could potentially be a good zone blocking guard. I think if he had been in this year's draft, you're looking at a 5th at earliest 4th round selection. Maybe with a good year in 2021, he moves into the second day of the draft. I think right now, as far as the list that I've seen and the names that I've heard, Zion Johnson is the highest rated senior that's going to go back and take the NC2A up on that offer of the extra year of eligibility.
Awesome. Well, it'll be interesting to see how he does next year at Boston College and to see if he can, in fact, improve his draft stock. Obviously, we're cheering for him. Hopefully, he can move it up as high as possible, but we'll see what ends up happening at Boston College. What other big names are you kind of waiting on, Tony, to see whether or not they declare? Any other names that you're kind of waiting on pins and needles for to see what they ultimately decide?
Well, I don't know pins and needles, but you're going to have to wait and see what happens after the national championship game, because you got Jalen Waddle of Alabama. You got Justin Fields, who I'd say, like Zach Wilson, it's about 99% that Justin Fields is going to enter the draft. So you got a bunch of guys from those two teams. Let's take a look. Let's not guess anymore. It's more Wyatt Davis is another guy I expect from Ohio State. I expect him to enter the draft. Patrick Surtain, Alabama, going to have to wait and see what he says. Haven't heard from Rasheed Walker, although I'm one of the few guys that are really high on Rasheed Walker, the offensive tackle from Penn State. Maybe he has made. Ronnie Perkins of Oklahoma, a pass rusher who I think is potential late first-round selection. I've not heard anything official on him.
All right. So some names to keep an eye on these next couple of weeks as players start to make their final decisions as to whether or not they're going to be going pro or not. Speaking of guys who have gone pro, we like to do this every week, Tony, and review some of our rookies that we've been keeping an eye on throughout the year. I know there's one on here for sure that we like to talk about a lot last year and that you were really high on, so I'm excited to discuss him. But let's start off with Logan Wilson, linebacker for the Bengals. Ends up playing in 15 games, gets 2 starts to play a little bit better down the stretch. 33 tackles, 2 picks, and a sack on the season. Somebody I loved coming out of the draft. Think he has a very bright future. What was your thoughts on Logan Wilson coming out?
We said about the entire Cincinnati Bengal rookie core, because they drafted 3 linebackers last year in last year's draft. That could change the face. And Logan Wilson was the top guy. He's tough. He's smart. He's faster than he looks, and he's scheme versatile. You can use him on the inside. You can use him on the outside. He was a guy who was a 3-down defender, tough run defender, also a good blitzer, not a liability in coverage, not unexpected the way he's playing this year.
No, he was really fun to watch on tape. You could see his instincts really stick out. I remember when I watched, I believe it was the 2019 tape with Jordan Love, and watching Wyoming's defense and how they attacked Jordan Love. I think they held Jordan Love in the Utah State offense pretty well in check. And that was a game where I really noticed, Logan Wilson stick out in that game. And yeah, I thought it was a really nice performance.
Yeah, and he's that type of player.
All right, let's go to Lynn Bowden Jr., which is one of the more interesting paths so far this season. Of course, he gets drafted in, I believe it was the second round by the Raiders. Maybe I think it was second round, and then gets traded before the season even starts. It was really early in the process too, where he gets traded to the Dolphins. They make the move for him. The Raiders were going to play him as a running back. He was kind of a gadget player in college. And then the Dolphins get him. They move him to wide receiver, although they did some gadget stuff with him as well. Ends up with an okay season, 28 catches, 211 yards. Also had 9 carries for 32 yards. Really liked the potential there, but it's just been a really interesting journey for him this past year.
Exactly. But you knew you didn't know he's going to be traded after being a second round pick before the season started. But you knew with Lynn Bowden he's a terrific athlete that just has to find a spot in the NFL because he was played all over the place at Kentucky. Was he going to be a receiver? Was he going to be a running back? If you go back and you read my report on him at Pro Football Network in the lead up to the 2020 draft, I said he was going to be a receiver who could also be used as a return specialist and run reverses on occasion. So it's just a matter of him finding a home. Granted, you can use him all over the place, but you still want to find one position where he can flourish at. And I think that position is receiver. I think the Dolphins did the right thing with him because I was shocked last year during the draft when the Raiders selected him and announced him as a running back.
Yeah, not a great look from the Raiders to pick somebody in the second round, have him change positions, and then trade him before the season starts. But, we'll see what ends up happening. And sometimes it's better to make those decisions when you know it, but we'll see what happens. And then finally, I know somebody you were very high on last year going into the draft, and that's Gabe Davis, who gets drafted by the Bills. He didn't have a ton of catches, Tony, only 35, but really made the most of them. 599 yards and 7 touchdowns, had 11 starts in the season and really came on strong towards the end of the year. A piece that I think Buffalo is really going to be able to build with as this, young Bills team continues to move forward.
35 catches, 11 starts is darn good for a fourth-round receiver.
Absolutely.
Gabe Davis was one of my most underrated players at the position last year in a position that was loaded. I absolutely love this film. You go back to the beginning of the 2019 campaign where he just destroyed Paulson Adebo, who people thought at one point in time was a first-round pick. It's not going to happen. Maybe he's a day 2 pick, the cornerback from Stanford. Davis has got size. He's got great focus. He's got terrific hands. So also been a real leader off the field for that Buffalo Bills team. He's done some good things in the community there. The one thing he didn't have was blinding speed. He was a 4.54 guy, 4.55 guy at the combine, which is what depressed his draft stock. I really thought that the New York Jets were a team that should have looked at him as their second receiver with those additional picks that they had in the 4th round. Didn't do it. He goes to Buffalo, compliments Stephon Diggs, having a real good rookie season. I can expect more things from Gabe Davis moving forward, better things from Gabe Davis moving forward.
Yeah, I think so too. Josh Allen at quarterback. You got Stephon Diggs really, taking the attention of the defense and the defensive backfield, probably safety over the top a lot. That's going to set up a lot of those intermediary routes for Gabe Davis, and that's somewhere that he should succeed. And you talked about that matchup with Paulson Adebo. It's funny. That's why, people love seeing those type of matchups in college football, and you really hone in on them, is because those are measuring stick games. And that was sort of a measuring stick. I know Gabe Davis didn't end up going second, third round or anything like that, but helped his stock. And certainly it was kind of since that point where Paulson Adebo's stock has kind of just continued to slip from that point moving forward.
But Gabe Davis, I point to that game, but Gabe Davis, you really go back to his 2018 film and you could see the makings there of a big time NFL receiver. And he just turned it on in 2019. The problem for Gabe Davis in 2019 was Central Florida was blowing teams out 28 to nothing, 35 to nothing midway through the second quarter. So they only really used him for half the game, if not for a quarter and a half, because the game was over by then. They didn't have to throw the ball anymore.
Yeah, nice problem to have if you're a college team. Not a great situation if you're a receiver trying to get drafted. All right, let's head to some final thoughts, Tony. I got some questions I want to throw your way. First of all, NFL playoffs start this week. Any matchup that you're looking forward to this weekend, and any bold predictions?
Well, I guess I don't know about a matchup, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, this is a team that didn't have 4 receivers against the New York Jets. They lost the game. They had their facility open and shut in the days leading up to the Steeler game. And they won that game to get into the playoffs. Now they're going to be without their head coach. That's going to be something very interesting to watch.
All right. And then what about the Devontae Smith Heisman? I was super excited that they gave it. I was worried that they maybe wouldn't give it to a wide receiver, but I thought he was more than deserving. I thought that was kind of a cool situation.
I mean, the thing with Devontae Smith was he destroyed opponents in every way, shape, and form of this year. In the end zone, long passes, just racking up yardage after yardage, reception after reception. I mean, he was terrific. And he really made Mac Jones a much better quarterback. Listen, I said, they had 2 receivers selected in the first round last year, the Alabama Crimson Tide, Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy. But if you go back over the summer, I said Devonta Smith was the most complete of those 3 receivers. And I say running backs, 3 of the most complete of the receivers. He's not as fast as Ruggs, but he's fast enough. He's not as creative or quick as Jerry Jeudy, but he's creative and quick enough. Plus, he works better in confined quarters. So glad to see it.
Yeah, he's a super fun player to watch, super talented. I'm really excited to see where his draft stock ends up. Obviously, first round pick, but just where in the first round he ends up going to be early out.
Yeah, I think he's going to, unless he runs some sort of dud 40 time, which I don't think is going to happen. I think he ends up as a top 12 pick.
I think so too. I think you're right there. All right. And then got to close up shop by asking you, we are entering the playoffs this weekend. Who's your Super Bowl pick, Tony?
Well, it's not the New York Jets. That's for sure. I like Andy Reid. I'm going to go with the Kansas City Chiefs again.
That's a good pick to take with you when you got Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. I get to have my final saying is I'm going to go with the Green Bay Packers for the Super Bowl, Tony. And what a better way for football to start off in 2021 than if we could get an Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, the showdown in the Super Bowl. I just think that'd be a ton of fun regardless. I mean, obviously, if you're a fan of the other team, then you're cheering for that team that's in the playoffs. But in football in general, Mahomes, Rodgers, Super Bowl would be a ton of fun.
Absolutely. The old and the new, if you will. And listen, credit to the NFL. We're here. The playoffs are here. There were people talking about, not going with the season when there were a few COVID cases shutting the season down. You had a couple of games that, moved from Sunday to Tuesday or Friday to Tuesday to Wednesday. And people were concerned. They got the entire regular season done. Credit to Goodell, who takes a lot of grief, and his whole team.
I agree 100%. And I've certainly been tough on Goodell and other issues throughout the course of time, but they've done a really great job in handling this overall so far. Never at any point in a million years at the beginning of the season would I have ever expected them to get through an entire regular season with every game played without postponing a game past a week or to another bye week or anything like that. No canceled games, no nothing. Just really well done overall how they've been able to manage this so far.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other final thoughts from you, Tony?
That's it, Andy. Sad to see you go. I'm sure we'll be seeing you on Twitter, and maybe someday we'll hook up at an NFL draft. Good luck to your Packers.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Best of luck to you guys as well. Again, thank you to the Pro Football Network. Thank you to you, Tony. Wish you nothing but the best of success moving forward, and I'm sure our paths will cross again sometime. That does it for me. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow Tony at Tony Pauline. Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of the NFL Draft Insiders podcast, and we'll see you along the way. Enjoy, everyone.